Everyone, and welcome to Top Tips for Archaeology Graduates. Today I am joined by Esther, who is a publications editor. Hi Esther, how are you today?
I'm good, how are you?
I am well too. Gorgeous sunshine today in York. Thank you so much for joining us. Can I start by asking you, what is a publications editor? What are some of the things that you do in that role?
My official title is Senior Assistant Editor, but that's because the journal I work for has different names to the role that every other journal has. I work for a bunch of different medical and biomedical journals that are owned by Springer Nature, which is a really big publisher that also has a lot of archaeology journals and obviously nature itself. And my job is that I read all of the submissions that come into the three journals that I look after, and I make sure that they get sent out for peer review. And then I make sure that peer review is done ethically and correctly, make sure there's no conflict of interest and no cheating. There's a lot of cheating in peer review. And then once it's finished the review process, I check it over to make sure it meets our language and ethical standards, and I accept it. So I'm the last person to click it before it gets published on the website. And the other thing I do is I look out for really interesting papers that can be put on Twitter and write blogs about and be promoted to the general public.
Wow, that sounds really interesting. Can I ask quickly before I ask the next question, are the papers super hard to understand? Like, are you learning about the kind of medical world as you go on in your job? Are you like seeing some really exciting new drugs that are being released, that kind of thing before?
The first 4 months was a really steep learning curve because at the time I was the only person on my team who didn't have a medicine or biology background. I was like the tester person that didn't have really any science. And then I proved that I could learn it. And I just have Wikipedia open at all times. And now I think there's another archaeologist and someone with an English degree and someone with a philosophy degree who have joined the team. That you can pick it up really easily. I think the biggest challenge I have is that one of my journals is alternative and complementary medicine. So that is, I spend most of my day translating things from Chinese and Korean and trying to understand folklore. But I had to do that for archaeology anyway, so I understand.
Yeah.
Ritual.
It's an anthropological mindset to get into that.
Yeah.
So what are some of the things that you really enjoy about your job?
I like that I still do some research because I have the alternative medicine journal. I have to look up what these ingredients and make sure they're herbs and plants and not animals. I've got to look up some anthropology stuff to make sure that the folklore matches up with what the actual science is. And I do a lot of ethical research, which is really interesting. So I spend a lot of my time making sure that, because I look at animal research, to make sure that all the animals are treated correctly. And I'm starting to learn the veterinary medicine guidelines backwards and forwards now. And I really enjoy that because not a lot of other people I work with get to do research. I think the other thing that's interesting is my editor is fairly hands-off, so I can kind of do what I want when it comes to promoting manuscripts. I get to find them, whereas other people don't necessarily get to do that.
Yeah. So you sort of get to have a little bit of a marketing mindset and thinking about communicating science to the public as well as part of your role.
We do a lot of science communication in general when you work for like a medical journal, but because we take the bonkers that is alternative medicine and I've got to make it look like real science, so I've got to like filter it into what we call science speak before it can go on Twitter, and then we have to take the heavy science speak and make it more public friendly before it gets sent out to the news. And so I help with that. We've got pitch writers who do it properly, but then I've got to break down the science for the pitch writers.
Yeah, that's a really interesting role to have. What are some of the things you'd wish you'd known about editing before you got into this field of work?
I thought it was going to be copy editing, and I'm not very good at spelling and grammar. Like my time at York was mostly spent agonizing over like grammar and stuff, and it's not copy editing. There is a huge difference between editing and copy editing. I think, sorry, my cat has just come in.
Oh, your pets belong to. Hopefully she'll make it onto screen at some point.
No, she's gone under my bed. I think the other thing I wish I'd known is that you don't have to have a biology background. It can seem because it's a medicine journal, you have to have like the pure sciences, but I'm not writing the papers, so I don't necessarily have to understand them. Anyone can do the job I do.
Yeah, excellent.
I think people often feel the need, like, if they didn't do archaeological sciences, then it shuts out the whole world of science. But if you can understand the basics of how a lab works, you don't have to have worked in it.
Yeah, that's a really nice point to make. So how did you get into this role? How did you go from being an archaeology student with us in York to becoming a senior assistant editor?
I finished my master's degree in York and moved to London for a job at the British Museum, which no longer exists. They ran out of funding for me. And I started applying for anything and everything. And I had a friend who had done archaeology at York with me that worked for the journal I now work at. And she said, well, they hired me because she also had a genetics background. She's like, I'm sure I could get you in. And I was like, no, I want to apply on my own right. So I didn't tell anyone that I knew her until we'd worked together for a few months. I was so adamant that I could prove myself as a non-science background person. But yeah, I applied for like 15 different journals, some of them medical, some of them humanities. And this is just the one that was hiring the most people. Journals are always hiring because it's got quite a high turnover. So I think that's something that's good to look out for.
Okay, can you tell me maybe a little bit about what was the application process like? Did you have an interview? What kind of things were they looking for on your CV or asking you at the interview?
So it's changed from when I did it. When I applied, it was you just send in a cover letter and like your CV, and all they asked for at the time was they asked for a master's with a science degree, which luckily my master's was an MSc. And nowadays they ask for any bachelor's degree. So it's shifted. And then I had an interview. The interview had an exam, which was looking at journal scope and looking at like ethical queries. And then the interview was just very, very standard interview questions. There was nothing too surprising. It was like, what challenges have you faced? Have you ever worked in a team? And nowadays I run the interviews for people, so we've changed the questions to make them more related to the job. But as long as you read Wikipedia about editing, you can pass the interview.
Yeah, I guess being able to demonstrate as well a little bit about team working and interest in the, I guess, the research of the journal is probably quite important as well, like expressing an interest in the kind of things the journal is doing.
Even if you don't like the particular journal you're applying for, as long as you can show an interest in academia and research, so like having presented at a conference will bump you up. Someone's hiring, like a hiring manager's list, and someone who's never done anything involved with research before.
Well, that's interesting to know. So they are looking for people who have an understanding of the peer review process a little bit as well.
Understanding the peer review process, and then understanding like being involved with science communications in Twitter is becoming more and more important. So if you have any presence on Twitter, that's already going to make you more appealing because you know how to run Twitter, which means you can run the company Twitter.
That's really interesting to know as well. A lot of students I know I'm speaking to enjoy social media and enjoy those kind of public communication things. So this seems like it kind of nicely aligns with being involved in academia and also getting to speak to the public as well. So can I ask you a little bit about your time at York? What ways do you think your archaeology degree has helped you with being a journal editor? I guess either in sort of specific knowledge or transferable skills as well.
Transferable skills. York, people I've spoken to who've done not archaeology degrees and archaeology degrees elsewhere have never done as much presenting as we did at York. We do like assess presentations, at least in my time there, it was like 2 or 3 times a term, plus your assess lecture, plus your seminar, and they're endlessly encouraging you to host and attend student conferences. And most of my job when I'm not doing editing is talking to people, and talking to people in a professional setting is much easier if you have a lot of experience with the verbal communication that we get through that. I think the other thing that was really good is team working, and archaeology gives you more team working than most people. I know lots of people that I work with now have come from labs where they're working alone and they don't know how to function as part of a team. Whereas on a dig or doing any post-ex stuff, you're working as part of a group. You have your little project, but it all feeds into a wider thing. And I think what I know about team working, I've had to teach other people that I work with now. I don't understand how they didn't learn it in their degree.
That's really interesting to hear. I have to say to everyone listening, I remember Esther so well because she gave one of the best assessed lectures about her dissertation. I really remember that presentation really well that she gave. Really good presentation. So I can see why, if you're using a lot of speaking in your job, you do really well at it. But the team working thing is also interesting. I think that's something that being on site and also the team projects lend a lot of sort of experience to.
There was one project that I refer to a lot because I now train a lot of people where I work, and it was when I was in third year, we had to collaboratively write like a paper together, which if you go down the pure academia route, that's going to help you learn how to write papers together. But from the other side, I've had that one experience of researching and writing like a fake paper, which means that I now know I'm very good at telling now when a paper's been written by different people and they haven't all read it. And that's really helpful for spotting ethical concerns. And that's a very, very specific skill that I didn't realize I would use so much. I can tell when an author didn't actually work on the paper. And author integrity is a huge part of my job. So if you can whip that skill out, that's going to impress so many people in your interviews.
That's great, thank you. So can I end this interview by asking, what advice would you give to archaeology graduates at the moment, perhaps if they're interested in working in publishing or being an editor?
If you go to conferences, there'll always be a journal there. Like I know a lot of archaeology conferences, someone from antiquity will be there to give advice to people writing papers, but they are more than happy to talk to you about like just helping out in the office. I know that I'm saying antiquities specifically because I've talked to them before at conferences. They are always looking for people to help out in the office from the sheer volume of author emails that they get. They might not pay you, but if you can get that experience, that will help. And I know that the post hole as well, you can, as well as submitting your essays to be published in it, you can get on the editorial team, and that little bit of experience working on the post hole or like any of the newspapers at the university will really help. And the other bit of advice, just keep applying. Like eventually somewhere will have the space for you, whether it's an actual archaeology journal or something slightly moving away from archaeology like medicine.
I think that's a really good
conferences and like trying it out is the best thing.
I think that's absolutely fantastic advice. I hadn't, before we'd done this interview, thought about conferences, but of course you're right, it's a brilliant place to sort of see academia in process and to get to chat to journals as well. And also persistence, that's something come through in many videos, and people just say a lot of persistence has helped me get the position that I'm in today. Esther, thank you so much for joining us today and talking about being editor of a journal or publications. Thank you to you, our watchers, for listening, and join us next time for more top tips for archaeology graduates. Thank you.